As you know, I love to get my inspiration from the page-a-day Zen calendar. And last Saturday, there was a very striking Zen saying, which I'd never heard before. A monk asks the master, what is the way? That was actually, Christians could say that too, but that's another way of saying what is Buddha, what's reality. And the master says, an open-eyed person falling into the well. So that raised all sorts of associations for me, which I'll go on to share. But first thing to realize, of course, this is an open-eyed person. So that's the whole thing about the Buddha being awake, which Jesus says too. Be awake, be alert, be conscious, be perceptive. Your eyes are open. You're not in denial. You're not closing your eyes to reality. So your eyes are open. But what does that entail? Where are you going with that? And so you're falling into the well. Reminds me of the Zen saying, which I like, the bottom falling out of the bucket. Now notice, you're not jumping into the well, because that's too much your own effort, your own decision. When you really wake up, it's a gift. It's something that's done to you rather than by you. Despite as a result of your effort, you can say, but not in the end entirely. It's beyond that, beyond anything you can do on your own. So you're falling into the well. And it's not oh well. It's the well. Because that's reality, the depths, the watery depths of reality. So you're falling into there and you're just, losing yourself to find yourself, killing yourself, drowning in order to ride, all of that. It did remind me of a very famous Zen koan. It's number 52 in the Book of Serenity. So Kaoshan asks the elder, the Buddha's true reality body, so the bottom of the well, all of that, is like space. It manifests form in response to beings. So, as it says, like the moon in the water, it says. So in other words, it's like space or water. I've seen that image before. And it reflects whatever is the form. It reflects. So how do you explain the principle of response? So in response to beings, And the elder said it's like an ass looking into a well. So here, you're not falling into the well, you're kind of looking into the well. And the well, the water in the well, is like that space, the water, the absolute, which can reflect back whatever's looking down into it. Okay. And of course, we're the asses. So there's that humorous, humble, like St. Francis, who says, the ass is our body, is who we are. We're not very smart, so we're just looking into the well like the ass. It's like the moon in the water. Interestingly enough, there the absolute is the water and the relative is the moon. Gregory of Nyssa, whom I'm going to go back to and quote in just a few minutes, the father of Christian mysticism in the 4th century, mystical theology, compares us to the water and the moon. Zen also says the moon, the fingers pointing to the moon is the absolute, reflecting in us who are the water. So it's kind of like the other way around, which we'll see again in a minute too. But that's exactly where we're going with this. Because Kaoshan says, okay, you said a lot, the ass looking into the well, but you only said 80%. So he said, well, what about you, teacher? In other words, what do you have to add? And Kaoshan said, it's like the well looking at the ass. All right, so there's this perfect joining of absolute and relative here. It's the relative reflected in the absolute, so the ass is looking into the well. But absolute consciousness, it's also the well looking at the as. So there's this perfect joining of form and emptiness, absolute and relative, which is characteristic, of course, of the Mahayana. And the poem, the commentary poem, says this: the as looks at the well looks at the as. Wisdom is all embracing. Purity pervades. It's practically a quote from the Book of Wisdom in the Judeo-Christian tradition, where it says, wisdom is one, can do all things, penetrates everywhere because of her purity. Everywhere, including the relative, in other words. In the house, no books are kept. Oh, we're way beyond books here. Right? This is pure consciousness. And this is, I like this too, the loom threads aren't strung. The work of the shuttle. The pattern going vertically and horizontally, the meaning is distinct of itself. So that's a good symbol as well. It's like a tapestry, it's like a woven rug where the warp and the woof, in other words, the absolute and the relative, are strung together seamlessly. Another good image for it. It's kind of like, remember the Sutra of the Relative and the Absolute, which speaks of a box and its lid. It fits together perfectly, the two, which are really one. Like the inseparable strands of the loom. So that's very interesting. But it evoked other images from for example, the Judeo-Christian tradition. I thought of the commentary which we read in the monastery at the night office during September, actually. Origen, who's a very famous 3rd century father of the church, quotes from the book of Proverbs, which says, drink the water of your own cistern, drink at the source of your own wells. So here we're talking about drinking, but it's the well imagery. And the idea is, you've got all the water right in your own well. You're the well. I mean, the absolute, the relative is the absolute too, so you're really the well. So you've got this water that's there, and you can drink the water of your own cistern, of your own well. You don't have to go look for enlightenment somewhere else. It's right in your own well. Just go down into the well, into the cave, as the Hindus say, into your own guha, your own cave down there, your own well, and drink the water, because it's there. And of course, that brings up all sorts of other imagery, as I'll say in just a second. So in symbolic language, he says, each one of us has within us a well. And we draw water from that well. He says, we have deep mystery within ourselves, a source, flowing water, and he says, so in the human soul, which is made in the image of God and in this Christian tradition, it too can have within itself and bring to the light of day wells and sources and rivers. So it's flowing water. It's a source. It's a river. But then this is where practice comes in. He says the wells of our soul need a laborer to dig them and clean them and shovel away all that is that's blocking them, so that the water courses of spiritual contemplation will be free to flow in their translucent purity. So there's another image there. The water freely flowing, provided the wells aren't all clogged up, with all sorts of stuff that gets in the way. That's where the practice comes in. So some interesting riffs on the theme there. And then, very much came to mind, this is Gregory of Nyssa again, his commentary on the Song of Songs. He wrote one of the most famous commentaries on the Song of Songs from the Hebrew scriptures, and then the Christian tradition as well. He evokes Jesus as the woman at the well, right? There's a symbol right there, and he says, whoever drinks this water will thirst again, but the water I will give, the source of wisdom, will well up, so to speak, within, leaping up to eternal life. So you get this fountain imagery. It's like an artesian well, where the water is leaping up. The water of wisdom, the water that's within us. It's both us and the absolute. It's both absolute and relative together. The Holy Spirit, if you will, in the Christian tradition. But the verse in the Canticle that he's commenting on, which I thought of when I read the page-a-day calendar, is the bride is compared in chapter 4 to a well of living water. And as Gregory says very well, could there be any greater paradox than this? It's in the nature of all wells to contain still water, while the bride alone possesses within herself a water that flows. Thus, she combines the depth of a well with the ever-renewed life of a river. So that she, her fountain, her life, her water are the perfect copy of the fountain, the life and the water of God. So absolute and relative together, again there. And quotes also the phrase that Jesus has in chapter 7 of John, where it said, out of whoever believes, out of their bosom will flow rivers of living water. And it's not sure whether he's referring to himself or the believer. But again, that's the whole point. Absolute and relative. It's all one water. It's all one leaping water. It's all one flow. It's all one well of living water. Purias aquarum viventium, or in Hebrew, beor mayim chaim. And a few verses earlier, the bride is compared to a garden. So think of the water well in the garden, or the watered garden. A garden that's enclosed, and a fountain that's sealed, a symbol of the bride's chastity, of course. But also the sense that you're closed off from everything that could militate against, the loveliness of the garden or the leaping up of the fountain. Now that has to be properly interpreted. Too often in our ascetical history, both in the East and the West, by the way, there's this temptation to think, I've got to conserve my energy. I got to make sure I got to keep it all right inside and make sure nothing leaks out. And this is, as Cynthia Bourgeois says very well, it's monstrous, it's ridiculous. I mean, the more you are in touch with this torrent of living water, the more it flows. All you got to do is let go, and it just keeps flowing. It doesn't depend on whether you can conserve your miserable little energy, because you're in touch with the absolute. You're in touch with infinite, source of water. So that's where real maturity shows itself. You're not just trying to conserve your little energy, because that's just the ego. No wonder it's trying to conserve its tiny little energy, because you're not letting it flow. You're not letting it out. So that's an important point. You're trying to keep it free from all the ego stuff and everything else that can distract you or pull you away from that flow. But the flow goes everywhere. Wisdom reaches everywhere by reason of her purity. It leaps up and fills everything, as the Zen tradition says as well. And that reminded me, by the way, of the famous image from St. Teresa of Jesus in her life about the different types of watering the garden. So it's a slight digression, but I think it's interesting too. She says there are 4 types of water for 4 types of levels of consciousness and recollection and intensity of, waking up and being fully awake. The first is when you draw the water from the well. It's like where you've got to just keep lowering the bucket and bringing it up bucket by bucket. That's kind of like the initial practice before it starts flowing. And her second level, when you really begin to get concentrated, as she describes what she calls the prayer of quiet, she compares it to what in Spanish, a noria, a water wheel that kind of automatically wheels the water out of the well. So the more you get into it, the more freely it flows. And then the third level, when you're really intensely concentrated, is just like a stream running right through the garden. And then her imagery is that, at the final, where you can not even distinguish anymore from, your eye disappears. is like just the rain falling right freely from heaven. It's constantly just absorbed. It's no effort on your part. And it is, as I said earlier, it's more and more a gift. It's not you're jumping into the well, it's you're falling into it, just like the rain falls. Or in the other direction, the water leaps up. And finally, this reminded me of something from my youth, many centuries ago. In high school, we were studying the poetry of Richard Wilbur, and I really loved this poem called A Baroque Wall Fountain in the Villa Chiara in Rome. And I won't read it all. So the first part describes, a fountain, with many levels and pools and rims and statues, and you've got fauns, satyrs, I mean, not F-A-U-N, very sensual, and then dripping, and flowing and relaxing, etc. And, that has a certain it calls it rippled shadows, clambering mesh, water lights, goatish innocence, etc. But listen to where it goes after that. He says, "Yet since this all is pleasure, flash, waterfall, in other words, passing, seemingly superficial, must it not be too simple? Are we, human beings, are we not more intricately expressed in the plain fountains that Modena set before St. Peter's, cathedral in Rome, the main jet struggling aloft until it seems at rest in the act of rising, guys are going up, spewing up, the pure fountain just leaping up, in other words, is what we're talking about, right? The main jet struggling aloft until it seems at rest in the very act of rising, until the very wish of water is reversed. In other words, it's, instead of falling, it's just rising, almost still in the air, almost gravityless. We're beyond gravity when we're floating like this. That heaviness borne up to burst in a clear, high, cavorting head. Clear, high, cavorting, that's just what it feels like. Joyous and free. To fill with blaze, in other words, the sun is perfectly reflected in those drops of water, just like the light, the pure light of consciousness in the torrent. And then in gauze delays, in a gnat-like shimmering, in a fine illumined version of itself, that's a good phrase, a fine illumined version of itself, that's what waking up is, decline and patter on the stones its own applause. Well, of course, we're not applauding ourselves when we're fully awake and fully alive, the torrent of wisdom and life and joy. But in a sense it is. It's an applause to life. If we're not applauding ourselves, but we're applauding life, which is what happens. But then this. If that is what men, humans, men are or should be, if those water saints that he's just described, so to speak, display the pattern of our arete, he uses a Greek word for virtue, what of these showered fawns in their bizarre, spangled, and plunging house? The different levels of the water coming down. So you got the water leaping up. What about all the water coming down? We're going back to that again, that first part. So what about that? Listen. They are at rest, which is what we should be, in fullness of desire for what is given. They're happy with what's given. This water tumbling down, moment by moment. They do not tire of the smart of the sun. They don't complain about the circumstances of their life. The pleasant water douse and riddled pool below, reproving our disgust and our ennui with humble insatiety. In other words, we who would, in our ego approach to all this, would just get tired of it and bored and, let's do something else. They're perfectly happy with what's given, with humble insatiety. They never have too much of something. Whatever is given, and they just love it. And then we're back to St. Francis. The ass, remember? Francis, perhaps, who lay in sister snow. And I think you're getting the clue here. Sister snow. You don't have to run up, and hit the sky with the torrents, leaping up. Right down the snow on the ground is our sister. It's right there. Francis, perhaps, who lay in sister snow before the wealthy gate, we're free of all that, freezing and praising. So the smart of the sun and the freezing doesn't stop our praising. As another koan has it, if you're hot, let the heat kill you, and if you're cold, let the cold kill you. It's just being alive, and kills your ego if you just live it. So just live it. So freezing and praising. Might have seen in this, the Baroque fountain, no trifle, but a shade of bliss. The land of tolerable flowers. Interesting phrase. That state is near and far as grass. Now that's exactly what a Zen teacher would say. The grass is near and far. The grass is right there. It's right at hand. That's exactly where the absolute is, but it's far. First of all, because it is the absolute right there in front of you, and you may not see it if you're not open-eyed and falling into the well. You won't see that the grass is everything right there. Oak tree in the garden, 3 pounds of flax or whatever, or just the fountain in its momentary bliss, that shade of bliss. That state as near and far as grass, where eyes become the sunlight, where the relative becomes the absolute. Right there and then. And the hand is worthy of water. And then the final phrase, the dreamt land toward which all hungers leap and all pleasures pass. So the hungers and the pleasures are looking towards this. The fact that they have all the plenitude right there within them, beyond themselves and yet in themselves. It's a dreamt land in the sense that we're not fully awake to it. But right there, in other words, right there in our everyday, not just in this leaping up to eternal life or whatever, the absolute, but right in the moment by moment reality of our lives, we find that dreamt land toward which all hungers leap and all pleasures pass. Or as our Mahayana tradition says, as Hakuin said, this land, this body, this is the pure land of the Buddha, and this moment is this body is the Buddha's body, and this moment is eternity. So this here and now is where the absolute is as well. So I wrote an essay on the Baroque, using that last line as its title, towards which all hungers leap, all pleasures pass, to show the Baroque and all. It's just simple sensuality. It is already a shadow of bliss, a foreshadowing of the absolute. In fact, an experience of the absolute. I was 17, so I think I was probably predestined to all this. But it's never too late. It's never too soon. Never too late to experience this. So fall into the well. But all you got to do to fall into the well is walk out on the street.